You're now live. Okay, and
That,
recording.
that we are. So
Okay.
to reiterate, if we could have a motion to commence the March Village of Mamaroneck Budget Advisory Committee meeting.
I make a motion to start the meeting.
Do we have
I
a second?
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can we have a volunteer to take the minutes this month?
Yes, I promised when I was in the hospital, when I came back, that I would volunteer for this meeting.
Appreciate it. I've got our agenda pulled up.
But should we approve the last minutes before
Yep.
we get into the meat?
Yep. Can you see my screen incidentally?
Yes.
Great. Yep, and can we have a motion to approve the February 9th meeting minutes?
I make a motion to approve.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. So this is a little out of sequence, but we'll go back up to number 1 on the agenda. So obviously a loaded topic, and thank you all for who have attended these. I am currently in my office, and that's been thematic lately, so I've had a hard time getting out of here for 5, but I will try to make a couple of them going forward. But with that, do you guys want to kind of go around the horn and go through your items from the work sessions, both takeaways and questions? And we could try to capture the questions in the minutes, but I'll take those also and then aggregate them in our running list of questions that we have.
I'll actually start with something positive, which is probably shocking for me. I was very impressed when Jason Pinto, the head of the rec department, said the ultimate goal for Parks and Recs is for fees to fund both departments.
Yeah.
I thought that was phenomenal news.
Yeah, I think if I can follow Alan's comments, Charles, I think a major concern, because there was a concern among a number of the trustees about the process, and at least maybe my colleagues will agree or not, but the issue about when to look at revenues was brought up, which is not scheduled until April 13th. And there was a big discussion at our last meeting to try to make that earlier and to look at the budget from a more comprehensive view as to expected revenues and planned expenses, so that we could discuss those things earlier in the process rather than later.
I would actually say, as a recommendation for next year's budget process, that if any department that collects fees, when we're reviewing their expense budget, we should be reviewing their revenue budget in the same meeting.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And
So it's done side by side.
I would suggest, Ellen, if you're going to make that recommendation, you also do it program by program.
Yes, within the rec department.
Well, but there are other departments that have the same thing, so.
Okay, yep.
yeah, yes, I think Alan's saying that department.
Yeah, I think that's what you implied, but
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
will tell you that if it isn't stated, it may miss a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I understand completely. But I think it needs to be aligned because, I mean, Dan, you and I both asked the new harbor master the same question about his cost of the kayak racks versus the revenue and the break even. If we had both pieces in front of us, we would have known the answer.
yeah. So I think that was, I'm glad that conversation, as difficult as it was for our trustee liaison, perhaps, it was it was a good discussion, and Victor was also strong on it, and it's really something that at least I think is important. And right now, it's kind of the revenue side doesn't come up until the last minute.
Well, no, Len, they changed the revenue. Revenue is now March 24th. and
Yes, I know
capital-
that. Yes, you're exactly right. It was moved, but in my opinion, still too late. But, because just as Ellen said, we went through Parks and Recreation. So, we've gone past, as well as the police department on police reimbursement. So we've gone past some of the departments where that conversation should have. And I would argue that Augie shared with us a document dated in early February, the same budget preparation document, which had revenue and expenses for 2022. Now, it's fine if it's not complete and not final, that's fine. But to have the conversation, not just with this committee, but it should be with the board as well, that says, okay, here's the outlook for next year as of right now. And here are the following things that must be addressed later on. But I do think it's important for us to get that picture as soon as possible. And I think Dan was pushing for March 10th, as everyone knows, and we ended up, which would be tomorrow, but we ended up at the 24th, which is better than the 13th.
Yep. The other thing also during that call when Dan was pushing for that meeting and Jerry was saying, he hasn't gotten anywhere with the capital plan and he still has all that to pull together. While we were on the phone, I emailed Jerry and I copied the mayor and offered my help on pulling together all the capital stuff and said, I'm assuming you like what I pulled together last year since it's posted on the village website, but I will do whatever you would like to do. And the response was, thank you.
Well, on that subject, when you're looking at the revenue and expenses, unfortunately now they've kind of changed the system a little bit. And this is what Dan has been trying to get to, and this is what I finally figured out. We have no accommodations for any capital spending in this budget. And we don't bond everything. What would happen in the past is they would have capital projects, and then at some point they would bond a certain amount of it, and then they would actually pay some of the capital expenses out of surplus general revenue. But if you're going to have a budget that you're already borrowing $600,000 out of your general funds to start with, and quite frankly, we've all looked at it and we think that it's a very, very tight budget. There's not a whole lot of leeway within the budget itself. I'm not sure where are you going to get the money to pay your capital expenses.
And not just that, Glenn, we've all, been looking at things that perhaps could be cut more during these calls. You've been highlighting, and I'm not saying this critically, it's the right thing to do. Right. You've been highlighting where you don't think there's enough budgeted on the expense side. And no one's paying attention to what you're saying.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, all the overtime is going to disappear. That basically what they said is you spent more on the overtime this year, and then they explained to me how we charge overtime to everybody, all the outside vendors and everything else. And my question is, well, if you do that, why is your overtime budget over right now?
Yep. One of the things that one of us has to remember during the revenue review call, so during the police department review and a prior meeting, it was mentioned that our reimbursement rate is definitely too low, particularly with the increased costs on benefits. When we made the recommendation last year to increase the rate, we also said to review it again in a year. So we need to bring that up and see about upping it again.
You, okay,
What?
no, never mind.
Yeah, they got a little defensive when Dan was talking about the process, but what Jerry and Augie and the staff have to understand is we're not criticizing that they were given a set of circumstances by the trustees, and that's how they developed the budget. What we're trying to do is inform the trustees that you simply can't look at your revenue and your expenses and not take into account your capital budget.
Yep.
Because everything that I've been hearing is they've been pushing off projects for 2 or 3 years, and basically what Jerry seemed to be saying is every department is sending in their capital budget needs, and it's like a tsunami. Meanwhile, contractually, we have a lot of obligations. We got paving obligations that we're going to have to deal with. We have the Hillside Bridge. At some point, they were supposed to start the new Village Hall. I'm not sure what they're looking to do there, but we bonded this year. We bonded over $5 million for this year, and I have a whole list of capital projects right now that are unfunded. And
Well,
we
that
still
was
have
one
a
of the-
third of the year to go.
Right, but that was one of the recommendations that we made when we submitted recommendations for capital planning, was that anything that goes in the capital plan for whatever fiscal year, at the debt service be planned for it as well.
Well, that's what Augie said, that the 2022 number includes, he didn't answer, includes new debt service that would be initiated in the next fiscal year. So in theory, it accounts for whatever it is, the 4 to 8 million, I can't remember the number that he had talked about, that would be financed in 2022. Now that surprised me. I thought that was the first time he had said something like that. But
I didn't read it that way.
yeah, that I asked him, I said, well, you're saying new projects that you're going to do. Yes. So, but if you look at the report that Charles asked for and got on the capital budget, it doesn't represent what your sheet, Ellen.
Yep.
It's a, and I think Charles is going to have it on the screen. It's like a list of like $22 million, of which I think it is just over 2, I forget, Charles, has been done. And it includes some of the big one, Taylor Lane, is it? So if you scroll
Yeah,
down.
and I had a couple of questions on that report. Like, I
you-
know we got a car for Jerry, but it looks like there are 2 cars there.
Well, you got to have 2. If you scroll down, if you scroll down,
One for
Charles,
each leg? I mean, what?
So it says here we've gotten 22 million. That's what's called the capital budget for this year.
Yep.
That's what it was, when we started this process, in which there's a huge capital budget, and we've spent about 2.7 million, at least as of March 8th, I think it was.
And are we in agreement as to what component of this has been bonded?
I think this 5 million number, the budget
Yeah,
adjustment.
but
is
what
the
you're
bond.
looking at, most of it wasn't bonded. I can give you exactly what was bonded this year. I have that list. Number one, the paving for 2019 to 2022 was bonded for $3.2 million. That is the majority of what was bonded this year. Then you have the new fire truck we haven't gotten yet. That was bonded for $829,000. We have 2 Chevy pickup trucks that were approved in 2018, $86,000. We have the HVAC replacements, which are all the air conditioning and heating units. I think there were like 5 different buildings we put those units into. That was $80,000. We have a new boiler for Fayette Avenue. That's $117,000. For 2019, we did the spray ground rehab for $41,000. We have the vac basin cleaner truck for $249,000. We have the a sanitation truck, $260,000, and then we have the sanitation Spectre compressor for $60,000. That's what was bonded. Jerry's car isn't bonded yet. We bought 2 dump trucks that aren't bonded yet. We did, let me just flip the page here.
Right, but if under Jerry's car, it says, village manager vehicle. And the budget looked like it was for 1 car, and the adjusted budget is 2 cars. How did that happen?
I did not see them purchase 2 cars.
They only purchased
all
1
the
car for
capital
about
spending. That might-
$48,000.
Right, so what's the 96,000? Can
Beats
you
the hell out of me.
Where am I looking at?
All right, scroll towards the bottom of this sheet. 2020. I saw it as you were scrolling. Maybe it's the.
I got the village manager. They did it through a manual purchase, and I have it down for $48,685.
All right, scroll
And
down.
that was
some,
H20.
Charles, scroll down some more. Stop. Let me. Okay, right. The first thing under 2020 capital projects. Village manager vehicle, Ford F-150.
Yes.
Yeah,
So it says 48,000 was the original budget. The adjusted budget is 96. It's double.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure why. They
and
bought-
the actual expense though is 48.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah, they
And
bought,
the same
they bought
thing,
one
the
vehicle. That
adjusted
might just be a
budget is-
typo.
The adjusted budget on the item below is,
It looks like that's double too.
Yeah, it looks like they're all. Yeah, many of them are doubled, huh? Or some of
Because
them.
the 2 dump trucks came to 460. They came to 461.
right,
Again,
and the
those haven't been paid for yet. We got the
And
2
the-
dump trucks for 461. We got one at the beginning of January, and we paid for the second one at the end of January.
all right, I'm just questioning the year-to-date adjusted budget column. Because it's double.
Yeah, that's somehow a mistake. It accidentally got doubled. We're not getting 2 managers' cars or 4 dump trucks.
Right.
Is everybody clear, or another way to put it, is anybody clear as to when you have a fund from a particular year that hasn't been utilized? So if we take the 2018 water main replacement at 525, which the original, presumably 2018 capital project, capital budget of 525, and that's now carrying into this budget and potentially next year's. What the mechanics of this are? Is it when originally appeared and was originally budgeted, and if it hasn't been moved forward on, we're still quoting the original year?
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
Because I don't either. And I mean, that's, you know, it's going back to 2011.
Yeah. What they seem to do is when they start a project, they will then come back to the Village of Mamaroneck and make an adjustment on the price. They did that on Barry Avenue, and they've done that on a few other projects. What they do is they'll start a project. We start to get bills for a certain project, like we've started to pay for Wingfoot, the replacement tank. We've been paying for the UV treatment, rehabbing, Shore Acres, and we're starting to see those bills in. They all come in under capital expenses for the water fund on the bottom of the adjusted bills. So this might not be 100% updated, because literally we're starting to get bills every single month now for 5 or 6 different projects going on.
Okay,
Right,
we got a little ahead because on the agenda we're looking at the capital budget, but it's upon us. And I mean, this 177,000 is an example, but there's a ton of them.
Yep.
This is all being aggregated in totals at the bottom from years going back to 2011. And Glenn, what you were just explaining makes a lot more sense, that if you started incurring expenses and it's carrying over, that would make sense. But in the case of something having been budgeted, nothing having been spent for 9 years, and it's still now showing a year-to-date unexpended balance that's the same as it was 10 years ago, I'm not really following this.
But yet, we approved months ago the new fire engine close to $1 million. And granted, we haven't paid anything for it yet, but I don't see that here.
That takes 6 months to a year for them to build and send.
No, I understand that, Glenn, but I would have expected to see that incorporated into the budget. It's been ordered.
Well, they actually they paid for it. I saw it in the it was listed under the I think it's listed under the 2020 budget, but that's part of the bond. It should be in H20, and basically they bonded it so the money's going to be sitting there for when it arrives.
No, the point that I'm making though is it's not listed under the capital projects.
It should be under 2020. I'm not sure why it wouldn't be.
That's the point I'm making. It's not.
Then you're absolutely right. It should be under there.
And maybe Augie can, in advance of the work session, if there's an opportunity, explain some of this, but not just out of the curiosity of understanding the mechanics, but to use this as a planning tool for the current capital budget. I would imagine it's extremely difficult to set priorities when you have all this carryover. And we were looking at a consolidated list of projects for the current fiscal, most of which weren't moved forward with. How do you then, work with all of this?
Well, when did you get this from Augie?
A few days ago,
Is it possible for you to share it? Because if I download it, I can go down the projects and check off which ones are paid and done, and which ones are pending. And as they get done, because what I do is I look at the audit of the bills every trustee session, and once something's paid for, it's listed after the abstract of the bills. It has sewer fund, and then it has all the capital spending. Like at this time, fire chief's car, as far as I know, hasn't been purchased yet. It's out for bid. The swing sets are done. The dock repairs is pretty accurate. I think we're up to $76,000 now after the last meeting.
if you just look at the I didn't mean to cut you up, but if you just look at the totals of all across all of these years of 22 million, and we're saying that the year-to-date actual expended is under 3 million.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, the one big
where is the original current fiscal capital budget, which was nowhere near 22 million, and this is all commingled?
Yeah, the big one I think you got to take out is the floodplain, the flood mitigation, which we haven't gotten funding from Congress, and I think that was like 7 million or something.
Yeah, but I don't think that's on this list. But I think I'm not sure it's productive for us to go through and for each one of these projects to sort of figure out exactly where it stands, because we have to rely and the trustees have to rely on the year-to-date actual expenses, which is either indicates completion or not, or partial completion. But the two issues which are important are the one that Charles brought up about, okay, what is the actual capital budget for this year? Why are the prior year projects in there? And then secondly, the mechanics of how the financing works. Glenn, when you were talking about projects that were financed by the $5 million, that's fine, because it appears to me that the financing is a reimbursement. In other words, the village, and Dan may know this, the village pays out of cash, its general fund cash, to complete a project, and then essentially maybe reimburses itself through the financing. And that's not unusual, certainly in municipal finance, but it would be helpful if we knew indeed if that was the case. So there are a number of both policy and mechanical questions that we have had for some time
Glenn,
that have not yet been answered. So,
Glenn,
yeah.
Yes.
Glenn.
Okay.
Yes.
Glenn, I wanted, I can send you this document. It was sent to the budget committee today from Augie. So I'm just gonna
Okay.
send-
Yeah, I'll do the expense report.
I
Some
already
of these
sent it,
expense re-
Ed.
Oh, you sent this?
Yeah, I sent it. But Glenn, why
Thank you.
aren't you on the email distribution for the budget committee?
I'm not sure why I get it, but I'm an eBay seller, so I get so many emails. I'll double check and see where it is. I'll find
Okay,
it.
but I just
Glenn,
I just sent it to you.
just a minute,
Okay.
you're on the budget committee email as GLEN 1N.
That's
Oh.
why I'm not getting it.
Okay, then I will.
I'm GGLENNN@yahoo.com.
All right, I'll check it while we're talking. Thank you.
Yeah, I was also saying some of this was paid for with grants. The hybrid cars, which I saw that number is also doubled. It says 110. We got $55,000 worth of hybrid cars. That's being paid for with the safety grant. The Scott packs are being paid for with the safety grant, and the $155,000 in police cars, which we haven't received yet, is getting paid by the safety grant from the dorm authority. So that $250,000 is done with safety grants. We're also supposed to be getting money for paving from CHIPS and Pave New York, but I've looked at the CHIPS revenue side going back to like 2017, and I never see any revenue. I don't know what's going on with that. And on our revenue line, we have nothing for New York Pave. Yet, if you look at the capital requests, it says New York Pave reimbursement $54,000, according to the former village engineer. And my friend happens to be head of DPW in Larchmont, and we should be getting CHIPS, we should be getting New York Pave, and we should be getting an extreme weather pave grant. There's 3 different grants from New York. I've asked about the CHIPS program before, and I just don't know why I don't see anything on the revenue line nor the expense line for CHIPS, and I haven't seen it for years and years. And that should be going to offset some of our paving costs.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because we have something like $800,000 in state aid. Now, I don't know what that is unless it's some of it is some of the money you're just mentioning, Glenn.
Well, 237,000 is CHIPS. Then you have we're supposed to be getting a revenue share for 150,000, and then the rest is basically the mortgage tax. But if you actually look at the line, the revenue share New York's held back this year. I have no idea when they're actually planning to spend it.
Yeah.
They cut it 20% and they held it back. And I haven't seen any money go into that CHIPS line in years. I even went and went to the auditor's report to see if I could find it there. And for 2018, I didn't see anything for 2017, 2018, 2019. If you look at last year's budget, there's nothing on the CHIPS line, and we don't even have a line for New York Pave.
So I guess there's a lot of takeaways from what we just went through, and I think we have clarifications as to where we stand with year-to-date actuals, where the grant stands, and if that's within the 500 or on top of it. Did any of you guys want to go through anything else from the work sessions, go into further review of our year-to-date actuals, and then where we are with projections? And if not, do we want to then talk about what we want to prepare for our 317 interim meeting, and kind of next steps with all this? I guess if that's where we're at, because we could keep going into the weeds, but we've come up with some big, broad questions that if we can get clarity on going into our 317 and then the final round of workshops, I think it'd be critical to get those answered and clarified.
Right, but I'm not sure in terms of our meeting on the 17th, what we hope to accomplish, because we've submitted to date 2 documents with recommendations that we received 0 feedback on. You've chased, Dan has chased. And we're getting nowhere. So I don't know if we're spinning our wheels.
We have submitted recommendations. We have not received feedback.
I know Victor has referenced our capital plan document, so I know he's read it. And based on some of his comments where he's referenced it, I think he's on board. But that's not official.
No, that was never adopted. And then I resent the operating budget to just ensure that everybody had that.
Yep.
I would think, look to, with that being more specific to this year, either have central components of that adopted. But if it's taken this long to get the capital budget framework adopted, there's a challenge there. But fine tuning that document to be more broad going forward, but that's maybe after the season, if you will, which might be a good sequitur into what Len prepared, which is even more active and live. And if there's takeaways from this, Dan, you have this. Do you have thoughts, Dan, as to how to potentially utilize this and have the board utilize this to guide some questions over the next couple of weeks?
I have lots of ideas. The question, what will get traction? And I think you will get more traction from the committee than from myself. And conceptually, the question is, I guess, multifold. First is, what happens if COVID does not, reappears, and we have additional issues? Hopefully not, but we need to be prepared for it. And budgetary wise, every organization that I know and every business that I know is preparing 2 budgets, if you will, or contingencies to a single budget as to what happens. That the budget, based upon what has been forecasted, is exceedingly tight. You're staying under the 2% cap by shifting expenses out of the operating budget to either the capital budget or to funds. And whether or not that is a desirable approach or not, that is a board decision, but it is a policy decision that they need to really think about the cause and effect. The worst thing that we have, and I think can you go back to where that was, the numbers? Okay. One of the things that Len has pointed out is the growth in the percentage of what our payroll is with benefits. And the rate it is growing. And the implication on a long-term basis is that it is not a healthy approach to life. And the village needs to take a very hard look and be proactive in a determination as to how to proceed. And so one of the things that I would recommend or think that you might want to recommend strongly is that you have a 5-year budget, not a 1-year budget, so that you can see the implications of where things are going. Does that make any sense?
Yes, and we've recommended that in the past in the January document that.
But I think it needs to be brought to a head in the discussion. There's one thing in submitting it in writing. There is another thing in talking about it, because it's then on the table in front of them.
So that would be done when, Dan, in your mind?
Well, I think you may want to raise it at the end of tomorrow night's session. Things to think about and talk about at the, when, the following week or whatever. Does that make any sense?
It would seem that the meeting on the 24th would be really important. I mean, that would be a good, it seems, just my thinking is that would seem to be a good opportunity for us not, to talk about, it's the April 13th was teed up as revenues, budget review of revenues and expenses. So if we're going to flip that meeting to talk about revenues and expenses, that would be a good time to bring up a multi-year planning thinking.
But what I'm trying to say, I agree, and I think you would discuss it then, but I think what I've learned with our board, why there are exceptional approaches to life. If they need it needs to germinate in there for a while, for it to take effect, either positive or negative.
Yeah.
My response is, though, isn't this the wrong time to try to push this? They're trying to get this budget finished. And they can't now.
You're never going to get a time to do it that's right. Period.
Well, we should be pushing
Doing this for a year, and we don't get, they won't focus on it. They're willing to this is a major step that the budget committee is being allowed to participate in the discussion of the budget. This is the first time in numerous years, maybe even decades, that the budget committee has ever been able to do that. So I would suggest you want to take advantage of it. But that's up to the committee to do whatever they want to do when they want to.
Time.
Say again?
I don't think there's time to develop a 5-year budget when they're trying to get this.
You're not going to develop
No.
a 5-year budget this year.
No, not now.
But the implication is, what is the implication for it? That's what you're trying to. We're not going to make major changes in this budget. It's too late. It really is. The board as a board said, cut the entire budget 15% for the sake of discussion. You wouldn't have time really to do that. You would just arbitrarily cut numbers, and then every meeting we would be changing the budget, from now until a year from now.
Well, the problem is when they tell the departments to cut 10%, there's nothing that they can cut because they don't want any layoffs, they don't want any furloughs, and you can't do anything about benefits and insurance, and the union guarantees the raise. So outside of what are you going to do with senior staff? Are you not going to give them any raises? That's a decision the trustees have to make. But otherwise,
excuse me for interrupting, but you have non-union represented staff that has a zero raise in there.
Well, that is a discussion for the future. In fact, Jerry brought up that out in Long Island, he used to have to pay 35% of the cost of his health care. Here, what we do is we have a system where you start to pay your health care, and after a certain number of years, it's
zero.
Basically, it disappears. It disappears into the sunset, and then you get free health care, not only as long as you're an employee, but for the rest of your life.
And in addition to the cost of your health care goes away with longevity, you then get a longevity payment. So there are
Yes.
two benefits there.
Well, let's let's assume for the moment, because we saw the email from Tom saying we might get $1 million from the what is it, the American Recovery Act or whatever. Okay, American Rescue Plan. Okay, now for the current year budget, essentially, board members may think the problem solved, let's move on. Now, I don't know, Dan, if your colleagues might think of it that way, or that gives us a year to think about the multi-year planning or how to address some of the longer term problems that we might face. So Ed is right. We're gonna have to get this budget done now. We're not gonna be able to talk about a multi-year thinking. But if we have a year, that's more possible. So that money may help the village plug a hole in the next year's budget, which is fine. Not that there aren't plenty of issues. So that's how that could be helpful, and how you think about it is really important, because if you think about it is that our problem is solved, let's move on, then we're missing a real opportunity.
Yep.
The second thing is the board has to understand this, in my mind, is that we're effectively assuming that the economy is going to be strong and we're going to be back to normal by June 1st. Because you look at the culture and recreation, that Jason talked about, that revenue, everything is going to be back, and perhaps better than it was in prior years. So, because we've got $1.5 million in the budget under the culture and recreation line. I don't know where the culture comes from, but
The art class.
but
Fireworks.
but so we're assuming by June 1 throughout next fiscal year, everything's going to be back to normal. And that may or may not be an aggressive assumption, but that's key to this budget. So those two things, if we get some money from the rescue plan, which appears to be likely, and what our assumption is, the big picture assumption going into next year, then all of that's really important. And then, of course, we haven't accounted for some expenses in the budget yet, to the best of my knowledge, like the village attorney. I'm assuming they're hiding some money for the PBA contract, which is standard operating procedure. But I don't know that for sure.
Right, but there are big chunks that are not included in the budget.
Yeah.
This sales tax revenue number concerns me also. If, this were to fall in line with 2019 or where we were at this year, I mean, this is assuming that we would be very close to this 3.7. I mean, there could be a lot of volatility with this
Except,
900,000.
Charles, what they're all saying is that 3.2 for this year is too low. We're going to be closer to 4 million. However, Nora Lucas attended a conference and she's very concerned about that number as well. And she brings that up at any opportunity on these budget calls.
The one, Charles is right in one sense. If we actually go back to normality, everybody's not going to be sitting in the village of Mamaroneck and buying everything off of Amazon or eBay. They're going to start to go back to malls. They're going to go to Stanford. They're going to go up to, Harriman. People are going to start to eat and shop back in the city again. So you may see a decline in sales tax simply for the fact that people are actually outside and spending their money in other locations than the village of Mamaroneck, and they're not simply getting packages off of Amazon, eBay, and the internet.
That's right. That's an important point.
But what they did with this budget is they got it. They have it to perfection. If everything absolutely goes right, we're still in the whole $600,000. And that bothers me. I think the parking is very ambitious.
Yep.
We have the new rental program for the pavilion looking at $115,000.
Yeah, I thought that number was crazy, and tents and all that stuff.
Yeah.
There's
State
no
aid.
way to support it.
And even with the act, we're going to get $1 million. Are we going to get it next year? Or are we going to get it the year after? Because we're talking about the federal government. It takes a long time to get money out of them. And we're not going to know how this year's budget goes until 2 to 3 months afterwards, because we haven't gotten the sales tax yet. We haven't gotten state aid yet. The mortgage tax isn't going to be in totally. We haven't received any of the pandemic money that Jerry's talked about. And I'm not sure if we're going to see any of that until July, August, September at first. And then we got to see exactly how much comes in. So my biggest questions are, number one, I think they're a little bit ambitious with the revenue that came in. Number two, on the operating budget, we have 3 methods of payment. Well, 4. We can bond it. We can have grants and state aid. What projects have grant and state aid either pending or were already approved? And how much of the capital budget are we going to have to take out of the general funds? And they have to figure out what accommodation you need to make in this budget in order to take money out of the general funds to pay some of the capital projects, because you're not going to pay for all of them with bonding. You don't have enough money for that. So that's the importance of the capital budget. And like I said, from everything that I hear from staff, it seems like everybody's pushed back off every single project that they had. Basically, if you buy a paperclip, go and buy it. If you're going to buy a box of paperclips, we're going to bond it. I don't see any servers. I don't see computer. Augie's already said that he needs to spend $20,000 for upgrade on the servers. If we get the police reform and we want the body cameras, I think, Dan, what was that? $100,000 outlay up front and then $50,000 a year maintenance?
Yeah. You also have to come to grips with one of the most important items in my mind is updating Unicity, which is the software package that the village has to run on, which if you're going to upgrade the server, you should upgrade the municipality. Otherwise, you're paying for something you can't use. And that's another $70,000.
My main focus is there is no accommodation to pay for any capital expenses outside of bonding. And you can't pay for pickup trucks and police chief cars and everything else and have money left over for when you need the $3 million for paving, or when you're going to have a major repair on a building for $500,000, or in 2 years when you need the next fire truck, which is going to cost you $600,000 to $700,000. You can't be sitting there bonding $3 to $5 million a year. That works for 3 or 4 years, and then that doesn't work anymore.
Well, I think you guys and gals need to come up with what you think is the best approach to the board and present it.
With that, what is everybody's thought on our 17th 3/17 meeting? Whether to hold it, what's the objective going into it? Because we have a lot of information that we've put together. We have questions, there's participation. Len's documents that he put together, if we want to make those available, that's even more current. So that's a thought, is to get input to fine tune those and have that be part of a submission with follow-up questions live. And we,
I'm sorry, Charles.
oh, go ahead, Len.
No, what I would volunteer, first of all, there's no pride of authorship in the document I shared with the committee, because I believe it's missing a lot of things, that number of things that were just mentioned here. So what if, Charles, if people by the end of this week can send to me edits, changes, additions, things you would do different to that document. And then next week, I'm sorry, on the 17th, I'm trying to think how this works. Then on the 7th, I would send it back to everyone so you could see it before our meeting on the 17th. And then we could send it to the trustees before the meeting on the 24th. In other words, I would take all the comments, send an edited version out. And if there are comments on that, get it back. But the point is we want to have a complete document by the 17th or 18th. And then prior to the 24th, Charles could send it to the board saying, the budget committee has come up with some blah, blah, blah. And we think it's important to have this conversation as part of our meeting on the 24th.
I would say that you probably would want that document done somewhere around the 18th or 19th, for the simple fact that if you don't give them time to look at it, they simply won't. There's so many things. So I would give them at least 5 or 6 days to look at the document, which means if we're going to get something in, I would say we would have to get it in probably by somewhere around the 15th. That way it could be edited and added to your document and then be submitted.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, the point is we've got the 17th set up as a meeting.
Yeah.
And I do agree that I think it would be helpful if we as a committee discussed the final of what we would send to the trustees. And the commitment I could make is turn it around and get it out to Charles to send to the trustees no later than the 18th. So that would be, I don't know.
That's the Thursday, and then the 24th is the following Wednesday.
All right, so that's basically 6 days.
Yeah, that would give them a weekend to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still have a work session on April 13th. Yeah, the budget adoption isn't until, not April, April 13th, and the budget adoption is the 26th.
That
That's it.
that meeting is tentative based on if they're looking to tweak revenues and expenses.
Which meeting?
The one April 13th.
No, that was originally the budget review of revenues and expenses, and now they've put the
Yeah.
capital budget down for April 13th.
Oh yeah, you pushed back the capital budget. So
Yeah, I
again,
mean,
that's
it really has to be done by it really has to be done by certainly the 26th is a regular Board of Trustees meeting, at which the budget is adopted. So we really don't have that much time between now and when everything is final, because they wanted to have everything final here by the 13th of April, but we flipped that. So we flipped that, and so now are we talking about trying to have our input no later than the 24th? That's what's making me a little concerned, but I think we've got to shoot for that.
If we have our questions and comments, some of which would be a summary of the minutes and takeaways from tonight to you by, I mean, is Sunday too late, Len? You know, if we shoot for end of day Saturday, and then that would be Sunday, Monday, Tuesday to integrate it into the document. We meet on the 17th for a recap and a review. If you had the document out to us a day in advance to digest on the 16th, something to that effect, or we could have our comments to you a little earlier by end of day Friday.
Well, I mean, I can commit to turning this around pretty quickly in 2 days, let's say. So, but everyone should get it in advance of our meeting on the 17th. So the 17th is what, Charles? A Wednesday, right?
Correct.
So I would want to send it out Monday,
Mm-hmm.
the 15th.
So we should try to have our comments to you by and Friday evening,
Yeah.
late evening Friday, if that's reasonable for everybody. Does that
Yeah.
work? Okay, great. Yeah, and no pressure, but Glenn, if you're in, and I'm certainly not the poster child for this, but if you're able to turn around the minutes relatively quickly so we could take some of the takeaways from tonight and digest those and use the minutes to communicate with Len as well, that'd be helpful if you're able to do that.
I'll try to get them done within 2 days.
Okay.
Actually, Glenn, did you get Len's document?
Yes, I did, and I
Okay,
found it, quite informative. I was very impressed, Len.
all right. I just wasn't sure what you're receiving, what you're not.
Yeah, a lot of what I get is Dan ends up forwarding it to me. In a roundabout way, I end up getting virtually everything, but occasionally it takes me an extra day to get it.
Okay, Glenn, just a minute. Where am I? Oh, shit. Hold on for a second. Okay, your email is GGLENNN 3 N's at
Yeah,
yahoo.com.
at yahoo.com.
2 G's and 3 N's.
Yeah. And I know Augie and Sally have it right because I always get their notices.
Okay, well, that's what we have in the village, and that's what I have in my private, so
Okay.
you should be getting stuff.
Right. So that's the plan, and I think we have a lot of questions and suggestions and live time feedback, and that this is an opportunity to make a valuable contribution live. Our other documents will hopefully be utilized, and we'll do what we can. So we'll shoot to have feedback to Len by end of evening on Friday. and we'll plan on reconvening on the 17th. Dan, you'll be sending out a Zoom for the 17th. Is that the plan? They will, but you'll be hosting the Zoom like we
Yes.
typically do? Okay.
And to Dan's point, one question, I'm not quite sure how to word it.
You want it for
so
7 o'clock
you can
again?
Think about it.
Sure.
Yeah,
I would ask the question of the trustees with the way the budget is now, right? How do you plan to balance the budget at any time in the next 5 years? You can't keep, raising your non-property tax revenue by 10% every year.
yeah,
You're
that's.
running a
key, yeah.
$600,000 deficit. Where do you see where you're going to be able to balance the budget the way you're doing the budget right now? Because I don't see, all I see is the budget deficit's going to be getting larger.
That's a great point. Staying within the cap. Did anybody have anything else for tonight?
The 17th, you want to meet at 7, correct?
Correct. That
Anyone
works for
not
everybody?
wearing green will not be permitted to come to the meeting.
Yes. Great point. Oh. Do we make a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
everyone.
much.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Good night,
Thank you
everyone.
for all
Good
Your
night.
hard work.
Thanks.
Likewise.
Thanks.
Bye now.